It was a rainy morning in New York City when Keanu Reeves arrived at the ABC studios. He stepped out of the black SUV wearing a simple gray jacket and faded jeans. There were no security guards pushing people away. He walked slowly, nodded to the staff outside, and gave a gentle smile to the young woman holding an umbrella for him. The moment he stepped into the bright hallway of the studio, there was a quiet tension in the air. People whispered. They always did when Keanu showed up. He was different from other celebrities. He carried an invisible calmness, like he knew secrets no one else did. Inside the green room, the Views team was busy. Papers were shuffled, microphones tested, lights adjusted. Sunny Hostin, one of the main hosts, sat cross-legged on a couch, scrolling through her notes. She was known for her sharp questions and her unfiltered opinions. When she saw Keanu step in, she gave him a polite smile, but her eyes stayed sharp. She was ready for this. Keanu sat down quietly. He looked around the room, noticing every person: the intern who brought him water, the older camera guy adjusting the tripod, the young makeup artist with tired eyes. He thanked each of them softly, calling them by name when he could. No one ever did that. The intern, a boy with curly hair, looked shocked when Keanu said, "Thank you, Tim. You're doing a good job today." But under this calm surface, something was brewing. Keanu had agreed to this interview because he knew The View was popular. But he also knew they often played games with their guests. They liked to twist words, make headlines out of half-truths. His fans had warned him online, "Sunny will corner you." They said, "She will try to make you look foolish." But Keanu was not afraid. He had been through worse storms than this. Finally, the stage manager called him out. The audience clapped wildly when he stepped onto the set. The other hosts smiled, a bit too wide, their eyes glinting under the studio lights. Keanu nodded at each of them, shook hands, and sat down on the tall white chair. Sunny leaned forward. "Immediately, Keanu," she said sweetly, "you've always had this good guy image. People say you're the nicest man in Hollywood. But come on, is it real, or is it just branding?" The audience laughed lightly, but there was an edge to it. Keanu looked at Sunny. He didn't rush. He folded his hands in his lap. "I think," he said softly, "being kind is not branding. It's a choice. I've seen enough in this world to know that kindness matters more than pretending to be strong." Sunny's smile tightened. "So you're saying you're always kind, never lost your temper, never made mistakes?" She tilted her head, pushing him. "Because, Keanu, people want to know the real you, not the saint they think you are." There was a silence. You could hear the audience shifting in their seats. Keanu took a breath. His eyes turned serious, darker than before. "I've made mistakes," he said. "I've lost my temper. I've said things I regret. But I've also learned that owning up to them makes you better, not worse." He turned slightly toward the audience, his voice deeper now. "And sometimes, what you see in the media is not the whole story. Sometimes what's shown is the part that sells." Sunny's eyes flashed. She was not used to her guests speaking back so calmly, so directly. She leaned forward again. "So you're saying we lie?" Keanu looked right at her. His voice did not rise. It stayed steady, calm like a slow river. "I'm saying bias exists everywhere," he said. "We all have it. I have it. You have it. The View has it. But the real question is, are we honest about it? Or do we hide behind smiles and pretend we don't push a story a certain way?" The audience gasped softly. The other hosts shifted in their seats. Sunny opened her mouth, but nothing came out for a moment. There it was, the moment that would go viral. Keanu Reeves, the gentle actor, exposing the bias on live TV, not with anger, but with truth. But he didn't stop there. He leaned back, giving her a gentle smile that somehow made it all sting more. "You see, Sunny, you're good at what you do. You dig, you press, you look for cracks. I respect that. But I hope you'll let your viewers see the whole story, not just the part that sells best." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Sunny looked at the cards in her hand, but she didn't read the next question yet. Keanu turned to the audience again, his eyes softening. "We're all humans," he said. "We're all trying, and we all mess up. The least we can do is be honest about that." Somewhere in the back row, a woman wiped her eyes. It was not what she expected from a Hollywood interview. It was raw. It was real. And Keanu knew this was just the beginning. There were harder questions to come. There were secrets he would have to face, but he was ready. He had learned long ago that when you stand in truth, you don't need to shout. You just need to stay standing. The air inside the studio felt thicker after Keanu's quiet, but sharp, truth. Sunny Hostin shifted in her seat, her face carefully composed. The other hosts exchanged a glance, as if they were suddenly unsure how far they should push. The audience sat in a silence that didn't feel like entertainment anymore. It felt like something real was happening, something they rarely saw on daytime TV. The producer signaled from behind the cameras to keep rolling. They had planned the next question carefully. It was about a rumor that had spread like wildfire online. Sunny took a breath, her tone softer now but her eyes still searching for cracks. "Keanu," she began, tapping her cards lightly on her knee. "There's been a lot of talk about your views on Hollywood lately. Some people say you're too honest, that you don't play the game, that you refuse certain roles because they go against your values. Do you think that makes you difficult to work with?" Keanu leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. He didn't fidget. Instead, he looked right into Sunny's eyes, then at the audience, making each person feel like he was speaking only to them. "Maybe," he said simply, "maybe I am difficult for some people, but I'm not difficult for the right people. I've seen what happens when you give up your soul for a paycheck. I've seen friends who were pushed to do things they didn't believe in, who lost themselves because they wanted to stay famous. It's not worth it." His words fell like stones into the quiet room. A few people in the audience nodded, their eyes wide. Sunny frowned slightly, not ready to let him have the last word. "But don't you think," she pressed, "that sometimes you have to compromise? That sometimes you can't always do what you want, not in this industry?" Keanu tilted his head, almost as if he were thinking about a memory. "There's a difference between compromise and surrender," he said. "I can adjust, I can listen, I can work with people, but I won't surrender my values to be liked, not anymore." Sunny's mouth opened to speak, but Keanu continued, his voice steady, a little lower now. "I know I'm lucky. I get to choose now. But there were times when I didn't have that power. I took roles I hated. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. I watched people hurt each other for fame. I watched people lie to the public. I hated myself for staying silent." The audience was so still that you could hear a phone buzzing in someone's purse. Keanu's eyes glistened for a moment, and he looked down at his hands, which were clasped together tightly. "I remember one film," he said softly, "where I knew something wrong was happening. A young actress was treated terribly. She cried every night in her trailer. No one helped her because the director was powerful. I didn't do enough. I told myself it wasn't my place. I regret that more than anything." Sunny's expression softened a fraction. She glanced at the other hosts, who looked genuinely moved. "So now," Keanu said, his eyes meeting hers again, "I speak up, even if people think I'm difficult, even if I lose jobs. Because the worst thing isn't losing a role, it's losing yourself." A low murmur of agreement rose from the audience. People could feel his words because they were true. They weren't scripted lines for a movie. They were confessions from a man who had survived the darkest parts of fame and still held on to something good inside him. Sunny sat back, folding her arms. She didn't know how to push him on this. The producer signaled her to keep moving. They had to steer the conversation back to safer ground or risk losing control of the narrative. But Keanu had already shifted the whole atmosphere. He turned, looking straight into the main camera. "Now, I hope whoever's watching this," he said, his voice soft but clear, "knows that they don't have to sell out their soul either. It's never too late to stand up for what you believe in. Even if you stood by before when you shouldn't have, you can always choose better." In the control room, the main producer cursed under his breath. This wasn't the viral soundbite they had wanted. They had hoped to catch Keanu stumbling, maybe showing a crack in his comm, maybe losing his temper. But instead he was giving people hope. And there was nothing more powerful than that. Sunny knew she had to change tactics. She picked up a different card, her voice turning lighter, almost casual. but her eyes still sharp. "So, Keanu," she said, smiling just a little too wide, "let's talk about your fans. They worship you. Do you feel responsible for that, or does it ever feel like too much?" Keanu let out a small laugh, the first laugh since he'd sat down. It was warm, almost shy, and the audience chuckled with him. "I don't think anyone should be worshipped," he said. "I'm just a man who makes movies. I mess up, I get sad, I lose people I love. I try to do better. If that inspires people, that's beautiful. But they shouldn't forget that they're heroes of their own story too." His words lingered in the studio lights. People leaned forward, hungry for more. They didn't come here for gossip today. They came for something real. And Keanu, sitting there in his simple clothes with his tired eyes, was giving them just that. And deep down, Sunny knew she needed to dig deeper. She needed to find the question that would finally make him slip. She had no idea that the next thing she'd bring up would change the tone of the interview forever, and that this quiet man would hold his ground in a way no one saw coming. The studio lights seemed brighter now, almost harsh, like they were trying to melt the calm that Keanu carried with him. Sunny Hostin shuffled her cards again. Her fingers tapped the edge of the desk as she chose her next words carefully. She needed to get control back, to steer this interview away from being his quiet victory. She leaned forward, her smile polite but her eyes cold with purpose. "Keanu," she said, her voice calm, "since you talk so much about honesty, maybe we can be honest about something else. Your personal life is very private, almost secretive. Some people say you hide behind that privacy to avoid hard questions. What are you really hiding?" A hush fell across the room. The audience shifted in their seats, uncomfortable yet hooked. Even the other hosts looked uneasy. This was the question they all knew was coming. Keanu stayed still for a moment, his hands resting on his knees. He looked at Sunny, really looked at her, and the silence stretched so long that even the cameras seemed to wait. "What am I hiding?" he repeated softly, as if testing the weight of those words. "I think I'm hiding the same thing most people hide, pain." The honesty in his voice felt like a wave washing over the audience. A woman in the front row lowered her eyes, feeling his truth press against something raw inside her. Keanu continued, his words slow and clear. "I've lost people I love. I've watched my family fall apart. I've held hands with someone as they took their last breath. I've gone home after a premiere, taken off a suit, and cried alone in the dark because fame didn't keep the people I loved alive." Sunny blinked, caught off guard by how direct he was. She tried to recover her edge. "But don't you think, as a public figure, you owe it to your fans to let them in? Don't they deserve the real story?" Keanu's mouth curved into the smallest, saddest smile. "They have the real story, the parts that matter, anyway. They know I try to be kind. They know I care about people, but some pain doesn't belong to the cameras. Some grief is not for sale." The audience burst into soft applause, not the loud, staged clapping they did for jokes, but the kind that came from hearts recognizing truth. Sunny wasn't done yet. She leaned closer, lowering her voice like she was offering him a chance. "What about forgiveness? Then there are rumors. People say you don't talk to certain people anymore. People you used to work with. They say you hold grudges. Are you really as forgiving as you want us to believe?" Keanu looked down at his hands again. His fingers traced the lines of his palms as if searching for an answer there. When he looked up, his eyes seemed older, filled with memories he couldn't share. "I don't hold grudges," he said slowly, "but I hold boundaries. People think they're the same thing, but they're not. I forgive people who hurt me, but that doesn't mean I invite them back into my life to do it again." Sunny opened her mouth to counter him, but Keanu raised his hand slightly, not in anger, but in quiet insistence. "Forgiveness is for me," he said. "It lets me breathe. It lets me sleep at night. But trust is earned back through actions, not words." The control room producer wiped sweat from his forehead. He could see the comment section already. Clips of Keanu's soft words, fans quoting him, people arguing over whether he was right. It was gold for ratings, but not in the way they'd planned. Then, as if the universe wanted to turn the screws tighter, an audience member raised her hand. Something that rarely happened in this controlled show. Sunny hesitated, then nodded. The woman, middle-aged with a soft scarf around her shoulders, stood up, voice trembling. "Keanu," she said, "can I ask you, how do you keep going after all that loss? How do you keep believing people are good?" The entire studio fell. Silent, no one moved. No one sipped water or checked their phones. Even the producers leaned in, their headsets forgotten. Keanu's eyes met hers with a warmth that felt like the sun breaking through clouds. "Because," he said gently, "I've seen people do terrible things, but I've seen them do beautiful things too. I've seen a stranger pay for another stranger's groceries. I've seen a man stand in the rain for hours just to give food to a homeless person. I've seen people forgive the unforgivable. I hold on to that." The woman sat down, tears streaming down her face. She mouthed thank you and Keanu nodded. Back at her, his own eyes glassy with unshed tears, Sunny sat frozen, her next card forgotten in her hand. The other hosts looked at each other, realizing this was no longer just an interview. It was something deeper, something real that people would remember long after the cameras shut off. And somewhere, deep inside Sunny's heart, a tiny crack formed, a quiet recognition that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the one exposing him today. Maybe he was the one showing them all what truth really looked like. Asterisk. The studio lights hummed softly as everyone tried to gather themselves. The atmosphere no longer felt like an interview. It felt like a confessional, a raw place where secrets could breathe. Sunny Hostin cleared her throat, but her next question slipped from her mind when she looked at Keanu's face. He sat there, calmly, his eyes a little red but his posture still gentle, open, like he had nothing to hide anymore. The other hosts leaned forward, sensing that if they didn't ask something soon, the audience would forget they were even there. Joy Behar, who had stayed quiet for most of the conversation, finally spoke up. Her voice was softer than usual, almost hesitant. "Keanu," she said, "you've been through so much loss, betrayal, the ugliness of Hollywood. How do you keep your heart open? Most people would shut down. They'd become bitter. But you're still so kind." The question hung in the air like a fragile thread. Keanu breathed in slowly, staring at the floor for a moment. He looked up, eyes tracing the faces in the audience, as if drawing strength from every person sitting there. "I tried to shut down once," he admitted. "After my sister died, after I lost my best friend, I built walls so high that no one could reach me. I thought if I stayed numb, I wouldn't hurt anymore. But the truth is, the walls kept the pain in. They didn't keep it out." His voice cracked a little on the word walls. The studio audience leaned in, some people holding their breath. "Then one day," he continued, "I met this old man in a coffee shop. He was just sitting there alone, and I sat down beside him because all the other seats were full. He told me about his life, how he lost his wife, his son, his job. I asked him how he could still smile. You know what he said?" Keanu's lips curled into a soft, sad smile. He said, "Pain cracks you open, kid. Let the light come through." I never forgot that. A quiet murmur of agreement swept through the audience. People nodded, some wiping away tears. Sunny sat back, her card forgotten in her lap. "So now," Keanu said, "I let myself feel it all. The good, the bad. I cry when I need to. I laugh when I can. I don't pretend to be okay when I'm not. And I don't pretend to be broken when I'm healing. That's how I keep my heart open." Joy's eyes glistened. She reached out gently, placing her hand on his arm. It was a rare moment of real connection that no one had expected to see on live TV. But the calm was about to break. Sunny shifted in her seat, glancing at her phone where a producer had sent her a new question. She cleared her throat and looked at Keanu, her eyes a little harder again. "Keanu," she said carefully, "there's something else people want to know. There's this rumor that you refused a huge role last year, a role that could have made you millions because the script didn't feel honest to you. Is that true? And if so, why would you turn your back on that kind of money?" The audience went silent again. Money was always a hot topic. It was the thing that made the world spin, especially in Hollywood. Everyone wanted to know why someone would say no to it. Keanu didn't flinch. He leaned back, folding his hands in his lap. "It's true," He said simply. They offered me a role that would have paid me more than I'd ever made in my life. But the script, it glorified something I don't believe in. It made fun of people who are struggling. I couldn't do it. Sunny raised her eyebrows, almost disbelieving. So you walked away from all that money just because you didn't agree with the story? Keanu looked at her, his eyes steady. Money's important. I'm not going to pretend it's not. I grew up without much of it. I know how it feels to be hungry, to worry about rent, but there's a point where money can't buy back your peace of mind. If I stood on that set, saying words that felt wrong, I'd be selling pieces of myself for a paycheck, and I'm done doing that. A young man in the audience, wearing a hoodie and holding his phone up to record, shouted softly, "Respect, man!" A ripple of laughter and applause followed. The tension eased just a little, but Sunny wasn't finished yet. She leaned forward, her tone sharper now. "But don't you think you have a responsibility? You could have used that money to help more people, to fund charities. Instead, you threw it away because you didn't like the lines in a script." Keanu tilted his head, studying her. His eyes weren't angry, just sad. "I do help people. I give away what I can. I've given away millions quietly. But charity that comes from a lie isn't charity. It's just guilt money, and I don't want my hands dirty like that." The audience fell silent again. A few people clapped, hesitant but genuine. Sunny's shoulders stiffened. She knew she was losing her grip on this. Every question meant to expose him only made people see him clearer. Not as a perfect man, but as a real one who refused to play the game. Keanu sat back, breathing in deeply, feeling the weight of every eye on him. He knew he was making enemies by saying these things out loud. He knew the tabloids would twist his words, the studio heads would roll their eyes, and some people would call him arrogant. But he didn't care, because sometimes the truth costs you everything, and sometimes it gives you back more than money ever could. And as the cameras kept rolling, the world outside that studio was already buzzing. People were texting, tweeting, posting clips. The headlines were being written even before he stood up. But there was one more thing no one saw coming. A question so raw, so personal, that it would pull the rug from under everyone. And once asked, it would test everything Keanu believed about honesty, forgiveness, and standing his ground. The studio felt like it was holding its breath. The air was heavy, as if the lights themselves were waiting for what would come next. Sunny Hostin looked down at her phone again, a new message from the producer blinking on her screen. She hesitated. This question was different, more personal, more dangerous. She looked at Keanu, then at the audience, then back at the tiny words on her screen. For a moment, she almost closed her phone, but her journalistic instinct won. She straightened her back and spoke, her voice quiet, but sharp like the edge of a blade. "Keanu," she said, "there's something people have wondered about for years. It's about your father." The word father hung in the air like a ghost. Keanu's eyes darkened just slightly. His calm didn't break, but the way his hands pressed together gave him away. Sunny pressed on, softer now, as if her voice could soften the blow. "You've never spoken much about him, but recently, an old interview with him resurfaced. He said you abandoned him when he needed you, that you've never forgiven him. People want to know, is that true?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. A few people whispered. The cameras zoomed in slowly, catching every tiny flicker in Keanu's eyes. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared down at his shoes. The lights cast long shadows across the floor. For a few seconds, it felt like no one breathed. Then, he looked up. His voice, when it came, was rough at the edges. "My father left when I was very young," he said. "He hurt my family in ways I don't talk about. He made choices that left scars we still carry. When I became successful, he came back, not to make peace, but to ask for money." His fingers curled into a fist for a second, then relaxed. "I gave him some. I hoped it would help. But he kept coming back, always needing more. He never said he was sorry, never asked about my mother or my sister. Just money." Keanu's eyes lifted to Sunny's, but there was no anger there, just a deep, tired sadness. "I don't hate my father, but I don't owe him pieces of my soul. Just because we share blood, Forgiveness doesn't mean I have to keep reopening old wounds. Sometimes, love means letting go so you don't drown trying to fix someone who doesn't want to change." The audience was dead silent. Even Sunny didn't know what to say for a moment. She looked at her cards, realizing none of them could touch what he had just said. Then, unexpectedly, one of the other hosts, Sarah Haynes, spoke up. Her voice trembled a little. "I'm sorry, Keanu. I think a lot of people needed to hear that. Sometimes families hurt us more than strangers ever could. Thank you for saying it out loud." Keanu nodded at her, his eyes softening. "No family is perfect," he said. "We're all trying. But we don't have to keep doors open that only hurt us when they swing." A man in the audience, older, with gray hair and glasses, wiped his eyes. He leaned forward, his voice echoing through the studio. "How did you learn to do that? To forgive someone who never said sorry?" Keanu gave him a small, sad smile. "I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. I realized forgiveness is for me, so I can sleep at night, so I can look in the mirror and not see bitterness staring back. Holding on to hate is like drinking poison and hoping the other person gets sick." The audience clapped, but it was a soft, gentle applause, the kind that felt more like a thank you than a show. Sunny shifted in her chair, a knot forming in her chest. This was not how she'd pictured the interview going. But then, her producer spoke into her earpiece. "Ask him about the industry, Sunny, the big one." She knew what they meant. The rumor everyone whispered about behind closed doors. The one that could make or break the rest of the interview. Sunny cleared her throat, trying to steady her voice. "Keanu, there's talk that you've been blacklisted by certain people in Hollywood, that there are big studios that won't work with you anymore because you speak up, because you won't do what they say. Is that true?" Keanu's eyes flickered with something unreadable. For the first time, he shifted in his seat, his calm surface rippling like water in the wind. "Some people don't like the truth," he said, "and some people don't like when you say no to them. I've turned down scripts that felt wrong. I've walked off sets when people were being hurt. I've called out directors who crossed lines. So yes, I know there are doors that will never open for me again." Sunny leaned closer, sensing this was the headline moment. "Does that scare you? Losing work, losing money, losing your place in this industry you've given your life to?" Keanu looked out at the audience, his eyes soft but unflinching. "It used to. I won't lie, I was scared of becoming irrelevant, of losing what I'd built. But you know what's scarier? Waking up one day and realizing you traded your soul for a lie, that you let people get hurt because you were too afraid to speak. I won't do that. Not now. Not ever." A ripple of applause grew louder this time, breaking through the heavy air. People stood up, some clapping, some shouting his name. It was no longer just an interview. It was a reckoning. A reminder that one person speaking truth could shake a whole room full of people awake. Sunny sat back, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't stop him now. The man in front of her was too steady, too rooted in something bigger than fame. But she also knew one final question remained, the one that would tie all his truths together, and when she asked it would push Keanu to reveal a part of himself even deeper than the pain of his father, deeper than the betrayal of Hollywood. The applause faded into a heavy quiet as everyone settled back into their seats. The studio felt changed somehow, like the walls had absorbed every truth Keanu had spilled. Sunny Hostin sat still for a long moment, her cards resting forgotten. In her lap, her eyes, usually so sharp and unyielding, looked softer now, almost human. She took a deep breath. This last question wasn't on her cards. It wasn't fed to her by the producer through the earpiece. It came from somewhere real inside her, a part of her that maybe she hadn't shown on TV in years. "Keanu," she said quietly, leaning in, as if this question was just between the two of them. "After everything you've shared today, the loss, the betrayals, the standing alone, what do you hold on to when the lights go out, when the audience is gone and the cameras stop? What keeps you here?" The room went so silent that you could hear the buzz of the lights overhead. The audience leaned forward, holding their breath. Even the cameramen, who had seen thousands of interviews, felt something shift deep in their chests. Keanu's eyes dropped to the floor. His shoulders rose and fell with a long, slow breath. For a moment, he looked every bit the tired man who had carried the weight of 1,000 headlines, 1,000,000 expectations. Then he looked up. His voice was soft, but each word was clear enough to pierce through every layer of noise the world had built around him. I hold on to people, he said. The ones who show up when no one's watching. The ones who love me not because I'm famous or rich, but because I'm me, flaws, scars, mistakes, and all. His eyes flicked toward the audience, meeting the gaze of the woman in the front row who had cried earlier. I hold on to strangers who remind me we're all connected. That kindness can heal wounds we don't even see. I hold on to every little moment of goodness. The barista who remembers my name, the cab driver who tells me a joke, the friend who answers the phone at 3 in the morning when I can't sleep. His voice wavered for the first time, and I hold on to hope. I've lost it before. I've buried people I love, thinking hope was buried with them. But it keeps growing back. It finds cracks in the concrete. It pushes through. Every time I think I can't stand one more heartbreak, hope reminds me there's still light left to find. A quiet sob echoed from somewhere in the back. Someone whispered, "Thank you." Sunny felt something wet slip down her cheek. She didn't brush it away. For once, she didn't care that millions might see her cry. "That's beautiful." "Keanu," she said, her voice raw. Do you think that's what we're all missing? Just hope." Keanu's smile was small, sad, but real. "I think we forget it's ours to make," he said. "We wait for someone else to fix things. We wait for the world to be kinder. But every time we choose to be kind, that's hope. Every time we stand up when it's easier to sit down, that's hope. Every time we forgive ourselves for being human, that's hope too." The audience erupted in applause, but it wasn't the rowdy cheer of entertainment. It was the soft roar of people being reminded they still mattered, that their choices still counted. Sunny turned to the camera, her voice shaking just a little. "Ladies and gentlemen, that was Keanu Reeves, not just the movie star, but the man. Thank you for being here." Keanu looked at her, then at every person in that studio. "Thank you for listening," he said simply. I hope you leave here kinder than you came." As the cameras panned across the audience, you could see it in their eyes. Something had shifted. It wasn't the questions that did it. It was the answers, soft, painful, honest. Outside, the world would take his words and twist them, turn them into sound bites and hashtags. Some would mock him, some would worship him, but none of it would change the truth he had spoken in that room. Keanu stood up, shook Sunny's hand, then walked down the narrow hallway alone. He stopped to thank the intern again, to hug the makeup artist who had touched up the tears he hadn't hidden. When he stepped out into the cold New York air, there were fans waiting behind the metal barriers. Cameras flashed. People screamed his name, but he didn't rush. He walked slowly, stopping to smile, to sign a note for a kid who could barely see over the fence. One woman shouted, "Keanu, how do you stay so good?" He turned, pushed back his hair, and gave her that quiet, knowing smile. "One choice at a time," he said, and with that, he climbed into the car, leaving behind a studio full of people who would never look at him or themselves the same way again.